things start. Oh, there we go. So what is the budgeting module? So what we're looking at here on the screen is kind of the old way or part of the process for our budgeting within Multiview. So we have our GL budgets and we have GL actuals. Those are two different tables stored within the database. Once information gets populated into those two tables, we put them into our Viewpoint Analytics cubes, and that allows us to create budget versus actual reports. So what I would like to say next is what's not the budget module, if my screen is going. There we go. So that's kind of the old way that we've done it. There are certain pieces that fed into that system which no longer are really needed with this new module. So we had a screen specifically for budget data entry. It was a very manual screen. You could still use it if you wanted to make minor little adjustments, but generally it's still the old way to do it. Additionally, we used to have the ability to, and we still do, have the ability to interface information into the system. So to do this, we typically would have used Excel templates and loaded your budget into Multiview that way. Additionally, we had external budget systems, such as Adaptive, that you might have used in the past, that you could also interface that information into Multiview. So what I would like to show you now is what is the new way of doing budgeting within the system. So now within Multiview, we have the ability to have everything contained within one location. So you're not having to interface in information from other systems or from Excel sheets. Everything is contained within the system. So because it's all contained, we're able to easily pull previous year budgets and previous year actuals into our budgeting module to help you come up with what is this year's budget numbers. To come up with those numbers, we have a bunch of pieces which we call workbooks. And within each of the workbooks, it allows us to really section out parts of our chart of accounts. So for an example, we might pick, we may create workbooks that represent your expenses, revenue, payroll, and so on. Once we have some of that information in, we use statistics very heavily in the system to help come up with those budget numbers. Those statistics, we use them to do calculations to come up with those numbers. Additionally, we can do allocations. So if you want to record, say, rent expense at one top-level department and then allocate that out over a number of other departments by, say square feet, we offer that module as well. So once all of the information is collected within the budget workbooks, that will create this year's budgets. We have a number of reporting options, which we'll talk about through today's session. Once it's all collected, we'll simply post it to the general ledger. That will allow us again to update our Viewpoint Analytics cubes and build your budget versus actual reports. So that's the visual representation of how the new budgeting module flows. Now what I'll do is I'll flip over to Multiview and actually take you through all of the working pieces. Let's switch to Multiview. Way too many screens open. Here we go. Can everybody see the new screen, the Multiview screen? Yep. Perfect. So what we're seeing here is this is our dashboard, or our desktop that we're initially, desktop is what I wanted to go for there, that we're initially presented with. And within this desktop, what we can do is we can set up multiple widgets. So each of these groupings is called a widget. And specifically for budget purposes, we've gone and create a widget just for that. And within this widget, it allows us to quickly access all of the different functions within the budget module. And this will also be depending on the access, the security access you have within the budget module. So obviously we have budget administrators. They're going to be the ones that will go through and do all of the design work, setting up kind of the shell of the budget, which I'll take you through in a moment. And then we'll also have items or users which are called contributors. And those contributors are the ones that will actually be doing the data entry. If somebody was set up just as a contributor, so just as a data entry person, they would only see the workbook they have assigned. So because we're logged in as an admin, we see budget admin, budget designer, and all of the workbooks. They would only see what they have assigned to them. So what we'll do is we'll go into our budget admin, and I've already opened a few of these screens. So within the budget admin, this is where we'll actually go through and hold all of the previous year's worth of information. So in this case, you can see that we've gone through and created a few different years worth of budgets. So we have 2015, 16, 17, so on. We're going to pick on. Sorry, was there a question? Yep. Oh, do we have a question, or just somebody that hasn't muted themselves? Okay, no, I think we're good. So within here, we're listing out all of our previous budgets. And within this budget admin screen, what this also allows us to do is very easily copy budgets forward or make changes year over year. So as an example, I mentioned we're going to be focusing on our 2017 budget. We'll go through and show you how this is all configured. But the advantage of this is once you go through and configure it once, so if 2017 was our first year, there's a whole configuration to go through, but each subsequent year, it's as simple as going up to the top and creating the next budget. What that will do is just advance forward all of the dates within the budget. So if we pulled, say, 3 years worth of history, so that would have been, 16, 15, 14, it's now going to move all those dates forward into the next year. So it provides a great tool to be able to easily manage your budgets. We can also go through and create revisions to it. So we simply want to make some changes, but we want to leave the original budget as is. We can also do forecasting within the system. So if we wanted to reforecast the remainder of the year, the last 6 months of the year, we can easily go through and accomplish that as well. And then the last option is to create scenarios. So the scenario will again be just a copy of a budget, and then you can change key drivers within that budget to see what the effects would be. So as I mentioned, we're going to focus on 2017, and I'll go through the configuration very quickly. At this point, there's only a few key pieces I want to make note of before we really get into the meat of the budget module. So within the configuration, as I mentioned before, this is kind of setting up the shell of the budget. Within here, we're going through and we'll set up things like what dates we're going to be pulling, what is the budget ID, so once the budget gets posted, where in Multiview's general ledger budget tables is it going to go. Also within here, we go through and we'll specify what level do we want to budget by. So by default, all transactions in Multiview must have at least a unit and account, but we can also budget down to the RAD level. So I know a lot of the clients we've worked with want to get down to that level. So just a quick question to you guys, would you budget at the RAD level, or not too sure yet if you're not quite finished your implementation?
We would definitely budget some of our RADs. I'm not certain all of them would be budgeted.
Nope. Exactly, and we can choose the ones we need to and only put those in the specific workbooks or sections of your chart of accounts that would be applicable. But at a minimum, we need unit and accounts. So continuing on, once we've selected what pieces we need to budget by, we also use our ownerships. So the ownerships will define kind of the hierarchy or roll-up structure that we want to pull into our budgets. This is what typically we'll see also used on your financial reporting. We can usually use the same ownerships for both of those purposes. If there was a need, we could always set up a different ownership for budget purposes. So as I said, we'll skip through some of these pieces as they're not too relevant to our demo today. This piece is important. So on this screen here, what this allows us to do is say, how many prior years worth of data do I want to pull into my budget module? So in this case, as we saw, we're budgeting for 2017. From here, I can say how many years worth of prior data. It's basically as much data as we have loaded into the system. We can go back and pull into the budget module to help you create your next year budget. Additionally, the next field here is talking about up to what point do I want to collect actuals. So generally, the budget cycle, of course, will start before the end of your current fiscal year. So we need to provide you a mechanism to project out the remainder of the year. So as an example, if this was set to, say, I can actually just change it. Let's say this was set to 1606. So we only had 6 months worth of data in 2016. We provide you a few different projection methods for the remainder of the year. So do we just simply want to show 6 months worth of actuals and then zeros for the rest of the year? We can substitute those last 6 months for what is the current year's budget. We could average the current year. So if we have 6 months of data, it's just going to divide that out and multiply it over the 12 periods. Or we can actually go through and look at the previous year's worth of actual history we have in the system based on the number of years of prior data you want to collect, and average out those remaining 6 months based on that. So I actually just want to set this back to 1612. So we provide a number of different options available. Here, we can skip over this one. So that was most of the pieces I wanted to talk about there. One other mention, or thing that I'll mention, is we've mentioned a few roles. So we have the administrator role, and that's really the one that's going to be responsible for building this configuration, building the workbooks. have that contributor who is doing the data entry. And then we have another role called the analysts. And the analysts are really just a read-only user that you can set here, and they'd be able to see all of the information, but would never be able to make any changes. So it's a great tool. We can do this at this level, or we could also go out to at individual workbooks and assign an analyst there as well. So I'll actually just cancel this because I don't want to save my changes. So once we've gone through and basically set up that shell of the budget, we now need to see, or we need to specify what information is actually going to go into the budget. How are we going to pull those different parts of our chart of accounts? In order to see that, you simply double-click on our 2017, and this is going to open our budget designer. So if anyone on the phone has ever played with workflow, this is something very similar to what you would see in workflow. And it's simply a way to map out the different pieces of your budget. So we have all of these different connector lines, which is simply an indication as to the order which things happen. It just helps you to visualize the order. Functionally, it doesn't restrict you from doing one before the next, but it's just a visual aid to help you when you're going through and creating these different workbooks. So within here, the budget designer is where we house all of the workbooks. So this is, again, the now kind of meat and potatoes of the budget. We have a number of different workbook types, which I mentioned at in that first presentation. To create a new workbook, we simply right-click anywhere on the grid here, and you can see we have a number of different options. Each of those different options will actually go through at this point. What we'll do to start is we'll pick on our non-payroll expenses. This is going to be kind of what we call a general workbook. We'll just double-click to open this one up. I'll show some of the ways that we can do data entry within this, this budget itself. Now, for this example, in this demo database, we have a hospital as our demo company. So we'll see a lot of these pieces will be hospital-related for these examples, but the concepts apply throughout the system. So what we see here we have the screen broken out into a few different sections. On the left-hand side, we go through and we have our sheets. And sheets are generally representative of our business units or departments within the system. So as you can see, as we cycle through, the data is switching on the right-hand side. On the right-hand side, on our rows, or our individual lines, are our GL accounts. And then on our columns, we've put two different sections. So this first section here, these are attributes. So these are just extra pieces of information that help us identify exactly what this line item relates to. So we can see this is Unit 130. Unit 130 relates to Department Finance. This is the actual account number. This is the account description. So those are the attributes. The next piece is the number of years worth of information we want to pull into the budget. So in this case, we can go through and see we have 2016 actuals, and then we've done what we call the three-column approach. The three-column approach is basically a preliminary column, which we can go through and use a formula to set up what is the starting point for our budget. Then we allow you to do manual adjustments, and then we'll bring basically those previous two columns together to come up with a final budget number. This is just one approach. There are many different ways we can structure this budget. That's part of the appeal of this. It's very flexible to be configured in the way that you want. This is just a popular way that we've gone through and configured for a number of previous clients. So what I'd like to do at this point is just go through a few different examples of how we can do our data entry. So what we'll start with is probably the simplest one, is if we go down to pretty much any field that has a 0 currently, we have the option just to manually enter a dollar amount. So if we want $1,000. Beyond that, we have the ability to use formulas. So as I mentioned in the outset of this call, there's formulas, there's variables. So sometimes we'll use formulas to reference previous years, or sometimes we'll use formulas to reference data in other workbooks. So as an example, if we wanted to use what was our 2016 actuals as our starting point, at the very top here in our formula bar, we can simply start typing our formula, and as soon as we start to type the first few characters, it's going to pull in what our formula is. So we can see that this is our GL actuals from 1 year ago. So the thing to note here is everything is relative to the year we're budgeting for. So we're budgeting for 2017, so 1 year ago would be 2016. So that's the starting point. So if we wanted to use GL actuals and simply apply an increase to that, we might say this is multiplied by an inflation rate of 1.03% or 3%. So we can see it's just increased based on that percentage here. Additionally, we have, if we scroll back up to the top here, you can see that we have some other formulas. So in this case, we've gone through and created two formulas that are referencing two different pieces. So at the very top here, in row number 1, we can see that there's the number of conferences. And we can see in this case that we've said we're going to go to 10 conferences this year. So it's pulling from this first column, budget number of conferences. And then we're multiplying that by our average airfare costs. So we can see, so it's taking 10 times our $600 to come up with our $6,000. Same would apply, excuse me, to our hotel costs. So something very similar where it's using the number of conferences multiplied by our average hotel cost. Now we can see above that our average airfare cost and average hotel cost are both grayed out. Those are called references. So references are basically saying we want to pull information from another workbook and bring it into this one to use in a calculation. So the way we've configured that is we'll go back to our budget designer, and we've created two other workbooks. One is called our corporate assumptions, which would have certain assumptions that will apply against the entire budget, which we'll open up and take a quick look at. So in this case, we've said, what inflation? So we could actually have a formula for inflation. And we've said in this case, it's 2.5%. We've said overall the average airfare cost is $600 and hotel cost is on average $1,000 per trip. So those were pieces that got calculated based off of the calculations we did here and pulled from that previous workbook. Another option we can look at is this per diem rate. So again, our meals and entertainment calculation is using our number of conferences, which we can see at the top here, multiplied by a per diem rate. And that's being used in a similar fashion. We created that in a departmental specific assumptions workbook. So that first one, the corporate assumptions, are things that would apply globally all across the system. We can also go through and specify a value department by department to provide different values across those different departments. So as we cycle through, you can see the per diem rate is $45 here, $50 here, and so on. So those individual departmental numbers would be applied to each of the departments as we cycle through. So there's some flexibility in the way that we set this up based on what you need for budget purposes. So a few other things on this workbook I wanted to show you. Another one of our data entry options is what we call a scratch pad. So sometimes we need the ability to add additional information beyond entering a single number into the system. So as an example, we're selected on row 37 here, which is janitorial services and supplies. If we wanted to provide some more information other than just typing in a number or using the previous value as our starting point, we can add what's called the scratch pad. So when we right-click, we'll go down to our scratch pads and add a scratch pad. And what this basically does is it gives us the ability to provide supporting information. So this is a fully functional spreadsheet control. So you could use this exactly like you would use Excel. In this case, we're going to keep it very simple. We've provided you with a very straightforward template. So we'll say this is item 1, and this is worth $500. We could add additional rows and columns. You can use formulas to come up with numbers. The idea behind this is depending on if you're budgeting by totals, which we are right now. So we're basically saying we have a 2017, we're entering one value and it will be spread across the system. We'll talk about the different spread options in a moment. So because we're budgeting by totals, we want one value to be returned, so that would be this $500. If we were budgeting by individual periods, which the system allows us to do, we can very easily go through and define 12 periods and just return those 12 different numbers to the system. So when we click OK here, we'll see that that $500 has now been transferred back, and we can see that in the description, this is now a scratch padded item. And it's locked down the ability, so we can't overwrite this number accidentally. So we can't overwrite that scratch pad. So a few other features I want to mention on this screen before we move on to a few other data examples are on the right-hand side, we have the ability to open up these additional panels. And what I'll do quickly is just dock them back on the side here. So there's 3 different panels that we have. The first one is the cell information. And within here, just like you will see on our Save Viewpoint Analytics reports, it's going through and providing us a little bit of extra information. So we can see what were the different values based on the different columns that we have. We can see the current status, who's been assigned to this. So we can see here, if we just expand this over a little bit, and I'll go through this in a bit more detail in a moment, we have those contributors, and for each of the different departments, you can assign who is the contributor, so who's doing the data entry, additionally who's doing the approval. Those are assigned at the departmental level, and we can see all that information in the cell info. The other thing that we can see, which is very helpful, is the history. So at the very bottom here, you can see that initially the work in progress, it was open, available for data entry, but we've gone through and submitted it for approval, then it was reopened, it was made not ready, and so on. So it gives us a full audit trail as to what's happened to this particular workbook, as well as which user in the system has made those changes. The questions and comments piece, this is a bit of a neat feature. So what we have is the ability to put comments on individual line items. So if, for example, I wanted to know bank service charges, this value is so high, you can easily come in and put comments. So if we go to comments, this seem high. That comment will now be shown within here. So we can see that it related to finance, which is the department we're on, the bank services account, and the individual comments. So you can very easily, if there were multiple comments, you could simply double-click on this. It would bring you right to the line item in question. The next piece is the questions. So we have the ability, once something has been approved, I'll just talk through this piece because we don't have the approver set up here. We basically can go through and create a dialogue between the approver and the contributor. So once the person is done with the data entry, they simply come up to the top and mark it as completed. That's basically saying, I'm done, I'm now ready for the approver to take a look at this. Once the approver has this, they can go through the process of saying, oh, you know what, this number, for example, there's no number here, the bank service charges looked a little bit high, so they can ask questions of the contributor or of the data entry person. And all of that information, all of that back and forth discussion is stored within the system. So instead of having endless emails or discussions on the phone or at their desk, you can have all of that information tracked within the system. And the last piece I wanted to mention before we move on is the variables. So as I said, we can use variables to create calculations. The variables are pieces that we use in our different formulas to come up with the different budget numbers that we have. So sometimes, as I said before, we could go up to our line item here and start typing equals GL something. If you don't know the different variable names or the formula names, you can always come over to the variables tab and you'll see all of the formulas that we have listed available in this workbook. So you're never left guessing as to what those variable names are. So very quickly, I just want to go into the designer of this just to show you that piece, and then we'll continue on from here. So I'm not going to go through all the details, but as I mentioned, we have the ability to budget by totals or by periods. So it's as simple as switching the type that we're budgeting by. We can say, do we want to allow scratch pads by totals or periods again that would match our previous option up here. Very quickly, we have this, basically all of these different tabs that we go through to fill out our information. At our sheet level, this is where we're choosing our business units or our departments. This is also where we go through and do the assignments as to who is responsible for the different pieces. So these are all of the different user IDs that you have available in Multiview. In this case, this is our IMUG database, so that's why it's all of the IMUG users. Additionally, it would be the same thing on the contributor level. So the approvers here and contributors over here. If there are certain sheets we want to hide and don't want to budget to, we can easily check them off as hidden. On the line level, this is where we would pull all of our accounts. It's as simple as going into the all add lines, choosing from your section of your chart of accounts, and pulling it into the workbook. So we simply get a presentation of your chart of accounts, of your ownership, and you simply check off the section which we want to pull into this workbook. So in this case, we've chosen total operating expenses as the top level parent. The advantage, of course, of pulling the parent is you'll see the summary information as it rolls up to total operating expenses in this case. The attributes, as I mentioned, were just the spread method, the unit and accounts. We'll come back to the spread method in a moment. External variables we'll leave for now. The columns, obviously, this is where we'll go through and define what are those columns. One thing to note, this just applies to the budgeting as a whole. This is a lot of information we're throwing at you quickly. This can be a little bit overwhelming. We will work through you or work with you throughout this process. This is something you would not be doing on your own. So don't be scrambling now to write down all your notes. We are here to help you throughout the process. So this will simply go through and just define the columns. There's a few different ways that we can see this. Certainly in the column view, it makes it a little easier as it's representative of what we actually see when we get into the data entry. Another thing I mentioned in the original configuration, we have the ability to apply analysts at a global level, so at the budget as a whole. And again, the analysts are used for reviewing information. They're read-only users. But I also said we could do this at the individual workbook. So this is our non-payroll expenses. We could make a user here, and they would only be able to see from a data or from a read-only perspective this particular workbook. We have the ability to upload, which we'll cover in just a little bit as well. So that's a very quick and dirty overview of the designer tool. I didn't want to go too far into depth in that at this point. And just a general overview of one of our workbooks. What we'll do is we'll take a look at our revenue side. So we've done our revenue in a similar fashion in the sense that it's using a very similar layout, except we've done it exclusively using formulas. And this is, again, another example of what we've seen in a hospital environment. So within here, we always will go through and budget at the posting level units, so we don't budget at a summary level. So in this case, we'll go down to our intensive care coronary departments. And on here we've done, excuse me, the same thing where we've set up 3 different columns, where we have our preliminary column, which is our starting point, our manual adjustments, which we can expand out to show full adjustments, and then our final budget column. But what we've done here is we look through these different items. You can see the formulas at the very top. So we've done something similar where we've taken our last year's actuals, our 1 year ago actuals. In this case, we've multiplied it by a multiplier. And you might be asking, and I certainly was when we got into this, what is a multiplier? So a multiplier is simply the increase or decrease over a previous year. Now, the way we've gone through and set that up is, again, very similar to what we did on the corporate assumptions on the non-payroll expenses. So if we go back to our budget designer, again, we've gone through and created these lines to indicate what needs to be done first in order to come up with the next piece. And what we've done in here is we've created revenue statistics. So we'll bring up our revenue statistics workbook. And for this database, we have just a couple of examples. In the real world, we have many more statistics. But in this case, because we're focusing on a hospital environment, again, we have created 3 different statistical accounts to represent our different functions. So in this case, we have the number of deliveries, the number of visits, and the overall patient days. And through each department, in this case, we've picked on 3, coronary, trauma, and OBGYN, we've put in specific values. So what we have here is, this was our 2016 stat, which it pulled out of Multiview's general ledger. We've gone in and specified what we expect our 2017 stat to be. So we're expecting a 100 visit increase, and that represents a 3% increase overall. Same thing with here. So we've done patient days. Last year was 250. We're going to 300. It's going to represent a 20% increase. Just to show you the quick decrease, on the OBGYN, we've gone 340 down to 310. So we're expecting a 9% increase. So what we're trying to capture here is just the change between 1 year over the next. And we use that change as the way to calculate out our revenue for the next year. So we're either expecting revenue to go up or down 9%, or 22%, or 12%. So that's the way we've gone through and built our revenue model. Of course, we also provide you the ability to add in the adjustments. So things that you know wouldn't be captured by this. In the hospital example, it might be, when I know later on in the year another doctor is coming on. So there'd be an increase based on that. So the adjustments are just capturing manual things that can't be captured in formulas. So moving on, those are kind of 2 ways that we represent our general workbooks. And that layout that we have with the sheets on the left-hand side representing our departments, and the lines representing our accounts on the right-hand side, those are general workbooks. We have a few other workbook options. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at the upload. So the upload workbook, we're going to focus on payroll for this piece. But the upload workbook is very flexible. And in this case, we've set it up for payroll, but it could actually be used in almost any of the functions within the budget itself. The idea here is we want to provide you a way to easily upload information that may be coming from another system, or you already have workbooks created in Excel or some other spreadsheet tool that you want to upload into the system. So what we do here, because this is a payroll example, we've gone through and created a payroll workbook. So this is calculating out, now in this case, what are the different departments, and then for 4 different GL accounts that we have in the system. So it's our wages, FICA insurance, state unemployment, and profit sharing. So what we need to do from here is we have this information, but Multiview, of course, needs to know how to read this information. So the way we specify that is we go into our book design. And within our book designer, that upload tab that I said we'd come back to later is now applicable. So we'll go down to uploads. And here simply what we're doing, on the right-hand side, we're defining how do you want Multiview to read this information. So the very first piece is the sheet name. So on the sheet name, we need to tie that to what is the tab at the bottom. So you can have multiple supporting sheets or supporting tabs within your Excel documents, and we simply provide one summary sheet, which in this case is upload, it's also the only one, to ultimately upload that information. So this is a great way when you have a complex Excel workbook that you can provide a summary sheet for, but you still want to make sure, you still want to ensure all of that information is captured in the system and can easily be drilled back and viewed within Multiview. That's what this upload workbook is great for. So in this case, as I said, we've created the upload tab, which corresponds to our sheet name. We can go through and start saying, what is our starting point? So in this case, we're saying we want to start at row 7 because that's our first data row in this case. If you know that it ends at a certain value, you can easily put that. If you don't know, or there's going to be multiple sheets that might end at different places, we can certainly leave the last row blank. But the final piece of this, and probably the most critical piece of this, is the bottom section. So this is where we'll go through and define which column represents what data. So in this case, we can see in column A, we have our unit ID, and that corresponds to column A. We're picking up these units right here. The next piece is looking at E, H, G, and I, and those are amounts for an account. So we've gone through and said, in this case, E is representing our annual wages. That relates to this account, which we've gone through and specified right here, and so on through the other pieces. So this is, again, a great way to capture information and upload it in the system if you've already done a lot of work in a third-party system such as Excel and need a mechanism to bring that into the system. And of course, the advantage is it's stored within the system. You can easily drill right back to it from any of our reports as well. So that's the upload concept. One example of it. It's very flexible. This is just one example of how we could use it. The next piece I wanted to mention was, we can close out of here. We'll flip back to our expenses for a moment, and we'll talk about the allocation workbooks. So when we can double-click on our allocation, again, to create a new workbook, it's as simple as right-click, and in this case, it would be Add Allocation. We'll take a look at the existing one here. Within the allocation workbook, we have the ability to set up multiple allocations within one workbook for a cascading or a step-down allocation. In this case, we've only gone through and set up the one, which is going to be our rent allocation. And the way it works is exactly as I mentioned before, we're simply taking a source. So in our case, we initially had booked all of our rent to one department, which was the finance department. So as we can see, as we read across this, so 130 is the unit that represents finance. This is the GL account for rent. And we can see on the right-hand side here that it was $50,000 was what we initially had booked to our finance department rent account. Now we wanted to go through and actually allocate that out across a number of different departments based on our square feet per department. So we can see that. So we go into our edit allocation settings, and if you're have great eyes, you'll see that we misspelled allocation, which we'll fix in due time. So this is our allocation settings screen. And within the allocation settings screen, this allows us to specify exactly how we want to set up our allocation, which makes perfect sense. All of the budgeting that we do in the system generally is pulled off of our ownerships. So the first thing we're presented with is what unit ownership, so what departmental ownership do we want to use, and then what account ownership we want to use. As we saw when I started talking, we can just move it down here. We can see that we're using Unit 130, which is finance, and the 650-100, which is our rent account. So that's our source. Now we want to say where do we want to allocate it to? So we're saying Region 4, which is the Hospital Administration Roll-Up account. We can see that over on the side here where we have Hospital Admin. It owns finance, marketing, insurance, billing, information systems, and so on. We can either allocate it back to the same account, or we can allocate it to a different account. In this case, we're putting it to allocated rents, GL account. And the last piece here is basically what are we going to allocate by? And in this case, we've used the facility square feet GL account. It's a statistics account. So what we can do is we can easily see here, as we're going through on the spread amounts, we have the ability to easily look up what was the different square feet or square footage in each of those departments. So for finance, it was 1,500, for marketing, it was 2,000, and so on. The next column over here is the percentage of the total that those individual square feet represent. And we can see here the dollar amounts which have been allocated based on the square footage. So that is, again, our allocation model. That's just one example. We can go through and set up multiple other allocations if it's related to kind of that tiered allocation or that step down. So if you needed to allocate rent first and then do another allocation that wants to take advantage of that first one, that would all be done within here itself. Continuing on, so the next piece I want to mention is the one that we usually get to around the 40-minute mark, which is almost exactly where we are, and that's on the payroll side. So we have a general payroll workbook, which would be very similar to what we saw before for our other workbooks, and you would use this in the event that you were doing a very simple calculation payroll-wise year over year. So if you wanted to apply just a straight increase, let's say there was a 3% increase year over year, you could easily pull the information in this way, use this type of workbook. And in this case, we can see we used last year's times 3%. This is the very simple method. This is probably the one you would use least because payroll is never this simple. But I just wanted to show you the different examples. So that's example one. Example two would be that payroll upload. So if you have information that you've calculated out payroll in Excel, or you can even export information out of a payroll system that you have that we can easily code to be uploaded directly into Multiview, we can do that using the upload. So general workbook option, payroll upload option, and then we have a payroll specific workbook. And we'll spend probably 5 or 10 minutes talking about this, a few minutes about reporting, and then we are good to open the floor to questions. So within our payroll workbook, the advantage of this particular workbook is it allows us to get very granular with our information. So what we have in here is we've gone through and have gone to the level of budgeting by the individuals. And in this case, each individual is represented by what we call a payroll record. So every person is a payroll record. We can also do this by groups. So if there was, say, union groups and there was an average salary across BATs, which you wanted to budget to, you could create a payroll record which represented that group. In our case, we've gone down to the individual level. So the way this works is it's really driven off of a number of attributes. So each of these pieces here that I'm cycling through are different attributes. So to see those in play, we can simply right-click, go down to payroll, and look at a payroll record. So a payroll record, again, just contains the different pieces that are going to represent this employee in this case. So we've gone through and we've specified them. We have 10 user-defined fields that are completely configurable on your end to come up with how do we want to calculate this person's information for budget purposes. Excuse me, in this case, we've gone through and said we obviously want to provide their pay rates. Are they a yearly versus hourly employee or an annual versus hourly employee? Are they full-time or part-time? What type of classification are they in? So are they an executive, manager, or regular employee? What is their default location? So what is their home department? This is a business unit. Are they 401k eligible? What's the percentage? Their benefits package, are they family, couple, or single? And then we can also do a mini allocation of the actual budget numbers. So in this case, we're whatever numbers we come up with for budget purposes. So this $104,000 in this case is going to be budgeted 100% to unit 134. But we can go through and break this up based on different percentages if budgeting is done at that level. Additionally, we can go through using the budget workbooks and factor in start and end dates. So if this person is starting, if we're using calendar year, they're starting in February, ending in November on a contract, we can base their, we can kind of prorate their budget information based on those start dates. Additionally, we can go through and put raise dates. So if we know that raise is taking effect in July, the first 6 months would be post-raise amount. The next 6 months would include that raise amount. So it's driven, there's some data options that we have in here as well. Now, what we'll have, so that's the one piece, that's one part of it. So that's the payroll record. Now, to actually come up with the budget numbers, these use some formulas. So we need to take a look a little bit further into this workbook to see exactly how we're calculating those numbers. So again, just like we did on the previous workbooks, we go to our Edit Book Design at the top. And again, this would only be available for designers or budget administrators. It wouldn't be available for data entry people. And what we'll do on here is we'll go down to our columns. And within our columns, this is where we've specified a few different things. Number one, what are the GL accounts that represent each of these pieces? So we can see that based off of these variable names. We've specified office salaries, profit sharing, group health insurance, and so on. Those are the GL accounts that we have in the system. And we'll just scroll this over a little bit here. And one of the key pieces, or probably the most important piece of this, is these formula tables. So we've gone through and set up 5 different formula tables. And these formula tables are what are actually calculating the budget numbers for payroll purposes. So we'll quickly take a look at those. And that's by clicking on this Edit Payroll Lookbook table at the very top. So what we've done here, this essentially is, for each of those different ones that we've set up, a condition editor. And it goes through and evaluates the conditions that we've set up here. So for our federal unemployment, we've gone through and said it's not dependent on any of those attributes we've assigned. It's simply going to take their pay rate, which in this case we just did a column reference to go 4 over, which was their pay rate, and take 6% of that. For health insurance, this has now introduced some conditions. So we're going to go through and say if they're a couple, family, or single, based on the attribute we assign to that payroll record, it's either going to budget per month $110, $150, or $95. Profit sharing is the same thing. So in this case, we've added some additional attributes. So we've said if they're a yearly employee, if they're full-time, and if they're in an executive group, they're going to get a 5% bonus spread over the year. Salary is fairly straightforward. Are they yearly or hourly? It's either going to take their pay rate divided by 12, or it's going to average it out based on the average number of hours worked, so a 40-hour work week over the year, and divide that by 12. And the very last piece, which throws another little twist, is the Social Security. So in this case, it's 6.2%. Again, we referenced the salary value is what this reference is. But in this case, we're going through and we're capping the amount. So it's going to hit that amount and then stop spreading it over the remaining periods. So that's the different formulas that we use. And again, it's just evaluating the different conditions and attributes we applied to those payroll records. So we'll see it in action here. We'll go through and just close out of this workbook. So as I mentioned before, we can look at things from a totals perspective, which is what we're doing now. We can see this grouping here is the total grouping. But we can also expand that out to show the periods. So as we scroll across, we can now see all of the different periods. So just to see how these formulas work, we'll go through and we'll pick on a few of the different people. So when we click on office salaries, we can see that the formula at the top was using that formula we just saw. This person's full-time, so they're using that pay rate divided by 12 to come up with the monthly balance. The profit sharing piece, it's going through and using the payroll rate at 5% of that. And the reason it's using that is because they're an executive 1. So that was the condition on the lookup tables. In this case, we've gone through and every single person here is a family, so that's a horrible example. But you can easily see that, I think we have some other examples here. Finance, I think. Yeah, so we can see down here it's used, say, $95 for some of these. So it's just going through and evaluating all the conditions. So that at a very high level is the payroll piece, all the different options we have available for payroll. I'm going to wrap this up by talking a few more minutes just about the reporting side, some of the reporting features we have. So once you've gone through and you've collected all of the information throughout all of these different workbooks, and really that's what this tool is used for. It's to collect and easily bring in the information to create your budget. There's actually one other thing I want to show you in a moment, but once we've collected all the information, if we want to look at that information as a whole, we can very easily create another workbook, which again, we right-click. In this case, it would be a report workbook. And the report workbook provides us a way to easily view all of the information across all of the departments in one place. So it's pulling everything from all of those previous workbooks or all of those other workbooks into one place so you can easily analyze it. In this case, we've gone through and just set up two columns, our last year's actuals and our current year budget. You can see obviously we're very under budget, but it provides a quick and dirty way to go through and do a little bit of analysis before the budget is posted. So that's one option here. We do have the ability also to, if we look at the views menu at the top here, we can very easily look at the budget data as a whole using some of our pivot tables. So in this case, this is just one of our pivots. We can easily add in some additional information as we need. It might be at the RAD level. It might be you want to see the account number and the business unit ID because those are not in by default. So we can easily add those pieces into here as well. You can slice and dice as you need here. So this is looking at the total amount for each of those departments and accounts. If we wanted to see the spread, how it spread information over those 12 periods, we can easily look at the same screen, just expand it out by periods. So we can see all of the individual periods itself. Additionally, we can go in and look at, sometimes you might wonder why certain information hasn't been populated yet. We can easily look at this process status, and this will look at our budget as a whole. And this is a little bit of an overwhelming screen when you first go into it, but it provides a snapshot of our budget as a whole, and will show color-coded the different pieces which are either outstanding or have been completed. In this case, we'll zoom in a little bit, so this is a little easier to see. All right, so what we're seeing on here is essentially the target in the middle is the starting point of our budget. That was our start of budget node we have in our designer. And then we're starting out with, kind of in the circles here, these are all of the different workbooks we created in the system. And as we expand out, these are all of the different departments we have within each of those workbooks. So as an example, as we scroll over here, we'll pick on our payroll expense revenue, non-payroll expenses. We'll scroll down for a minute. If we wanted to go through and look at demo collections, this one is still red. We're wondering why it hasn't been completed. We can very easily just double click, and it should launch us right back into the budget designer, into that budget workbook. So in this case, we can see that this was an upload workbook, and it has yet been completed. It's still showing as work in progress, which means it's still outstanding and has not been completed. And the very last piece that I wanted to mention was the last reporting piece. So once we've gone through, we'll close out of here. Once we've gone through and we reviewed all the data collection has been done across all of these different workbooks, we ultimately go up and we post the information to the GL, and that makes it available for reporting in our Viewpoint Analytics report. So I've created a very simple analytics report that I have open at the top here. And in this case, I've advanced the years forward, so we're looking at 17 actuals versus 17 budget. So you might wonder, how has this number been created? So this $7 million, how was that actually created? Right from our analytics tool, we have the ability to view the transactions. So we can drill all the way back from analytics right into our individual budget workbooks themselves. So because we were looking at this as a summarized view, we can see all of the different departments that have populated this information. So if we wanted to look at this individual number here, this $324,000, we can, again, very easily just show the source. And this will bring us to our spread. So this is going to show us the per period amount. So we can see this was for period 1701. It was for $324,000. But the total on the right-hand side is actually this total over here. We can see it, the total as a whole. So if we wanted to go one level further, we can view the book itself. And this will actually launch us right into the budget workbook editor itself. In a moment. So there we go. There we go. So we do have the ability to drill all the way back from pretty much any of our reports that we have. And it obviously creates great visibility within the budget itself. And at this point, I think I've shown you all I wanted to show. I spoke a little longer than I expected, but I would like to open it up to any questions you might have at this point. Or you're all just overwhelmed and have nothing.
The payroll workbook that you have when you were showing that, is that a document that you use to help prepare payroll itself, or is that a copy of what your payroll system uses? How's that data come about?
Well, this data in our case here, we go through and we'll define, the payroll workbook is defined by those user-defined fields. So this would not be used to generate payroll numbers in the system. This is only for budget purposes. What we've done here is if this opens up here, double click, sorry. We've gone through and we've set this up to have those user-defined fields, which we're defining those attributes. And then we actually created a spreadsheet to load in all of these payroll records. So if you had a separate payroll system and you had kind of all of the information that we define those user-defined fields, so it's, say, the employee ID, their pay rates, whatever other attributes you want to assign, we most likely could load that information into the system instead of you having to go through and create these individual payroll records individually. This is only for budget purposes, is what we're calculating out here. It's not used to actually do payroll.
And because of the sensitive nature of payroll
Sure.
amounts, I'm assuming you have ways to lock that down as far as access as to who can see that.
We do, absolutely. So access is done in two different ways. So if you go back to our very start, let's go back down to budget here. So budgeting menu. We have two ways that we look at security. We have security codes within the system. One of them is to restrict access to budget admin. The other is to restrict access to the payroll side. So those are two distinct security codes that would allow people to either access or not have access to the setup screens for payroll and budget. But then we also have the ability to put in those contributors and approvers. So when we're looking at this, in this case we've just set up one user, which is manager. If the person was not flagged as a contributor or an approver, or they weren't an administrator, they wouldn't be able to see any of this information. So the shorter answer is yes, we have the ability to lock that down.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So you come up with an annual figure for an expense or revenue line item. That's going to have to be broken out into monthly figures before it goes to final press on this.
Yes.
What kind of capabilities do we have for doing that?
Yes, the spreads. I do apologize. I mentioned I was going to come back to it and I didn't. I'll show you that right now. So if we go down, I think we can look at it here. We'll go to the designer. So within our designer, we can go through and specify the way in which we want to spread information if we budget by totals. So if you go in and put, I'll show you the methods here. So when we're on our even method, if we put $12,000 in our total, it's going to spread $1,000 per month. The next option we have is the days and period. So so February, for example, at 28 days is going to take 28 of 365 and spread based on that. You can spread out using an average over the system. So for statistical accounts, you know what, do you want it to, so let's say it was a statistic of 1 was the number. Do you want each period to be 1 and the total to be 1, or do you want it to sum up to 12? So it would be averaging over the periods. Or the historical method. So the historical method is looking at, again, the number of previous years that we've pulled into the system or in this particular workbook and can average based on that. The advantage of using the historical is that you can capture seasonality into the spreading that the system would do automatically. We're also looking at ways to allow you to create customized spread methods. So one option we have for that is to use a statistic account and basically go through period by period and put what is your total ending up with 1 at the end. So you get a full 100% of your spread. We're trying to come up with different ways of doing that, but the ones you see here are the default ones that we have available.
Okay.
A great question, though. Thank you. Anything else?
When you were showing how the kind of the card was set up for the employee and how you can allocate that particular employee's information, is that information in that card, is that uploaded or do you have to manually do that in?
So initially it was uploaded, so let me just go back to that workbook for a moment. So what we did was, and I can see very quickly if I have that, if I can just bring that up here in 1 second. Too many screens up here. Sorry, I just want to see if I can bring up that information here. What we did was we actually uploaded it into the system. Just trying to see if I still have that somewhere. Documents. I don't offhand. Basically what we did was when we go into our book design in here, or actually no, it's not in here, sorry. 1 second. The short answer is yes, you can upload it. What we have is when we're looking at our payroll, so we have a number of different payroll options from our designer, we can upload payroll. So when we do this, it allows us to take all of the payroll records, which were representing all of those individuals, and upload them into the system based off of a what are the different user-defined fields that we have. So all of those different attributes that we created, we can upload the information to match those different attributes. So you don't have to do it manually. There is certainly a way to do it manually if you have one new employee to add, but initially when you're doing this and you want to add them all, you can upload that information.
And is this from a payroll standpoint that you have, or as an outside vendor?
This is from as far as which piece? I'm sorry.
The payroll, the
payroll, yeah. So, well, the interfacing is in our format. So it doesn't matter where the information is coming from, as long as it meets a certain format that we can provide you. And that format is just representing those different attributes that we've assigned. So in that case, the salary amount, the departments, and so on.
Yep, perfect.
Perfect. Thank you for the questions. Anything else we can answer?
I don't have anything at this moment.
Perfect. Well, thank you for the questions. Well, if there's nothing else, Stephanie, I'll turn it back to you to wrap up here.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Always a great job and great questions. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Like I said, I'll send a recap email. So if you don't have my contact information for whatever reason, you can certainly reach out. And Diana's not on this, but she's part of my team as well, so I'll just copy her if you ever worked with Diana before. So if you need any pricing or have any other questions you can think of after this, feel free to reach out. And appreciate your time, everyone. Thanks for joining. Okay.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks again. Have a good one. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.